Hey everyone, I'm Maurice Falk. I'm a storyboard artist in the film industry, and today I'm going to show you Whippet GP. I'm going to take you through the installation process, how to bind the operators to your keyboard shortcuts, and then I'm going to show you a couple of demos on how everything works and the philosophy behind a few things and some of the working methods with the menus. All right, let's jump in. Whippet GP installs like every other add-on. All you need to do is go to Edit, Preferences, and then you want to go to Add-ons, and then you want to click Install, and then you want to find where it's located on your computer. So once you hit Install, and you select the zip file from where you saved Whippet GP, then you want to expand this, tick it on, and you should see it pop up here on your right in the sidebar. There's a link here for the documentation, which brings you to my website, and there's a bit of explanation on how it works, setting up the operators as well, which I'll show you. So there's that's handy. So we can close this, and then if you don't see it here on your right, you press N, you should get the sidebar here, and then you can click on Whippet GP, which should be at the bottom. So the operators you can see here in this top box, we combine them to keyboard shortcuts. And the way that works is basically when you add a new keyframe, it adds another drawing, and it adds it so many frames in advance. And if you want to duplicate, frame 13, you can duplicate it, and it'll duplicate it at frame 25. So it's really nice to be hovering over your canvas, drawing in your camera window versus going down the timeline and moving it over. So you can change how many frames you want to jump up to 48, and we can bind these buttons to keyboard shortcuts. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So you go to Edit, you go to Preferences, you go to Key Map. This is your window for all of your shortcuts. And you can search shortcuts here as well. If you, for instance, I already have these set up. So if I hit Shift, if I type in Shift F, it'll show me that I have something bound to Shift and F. But you will not have that bound, so we're gonna just go back, scroll down, and we want to find the grease pencil section. So this is shortcuts that work when you're in grease pencil. So you want to go to grease pencil stroke paint mode, expand that, scroll to the bottom, and then you'll see this add new button. And then from here you'll expand that one, and then here you should be able to type in Whippet, and it will bring up all the operators that relate to this top box here. So if you were to add Whippet GP, add new keyframe, then that's this button here, the new frame one, and then you can bind it to any keyboard shortcut that you have. I've already done this for clear layers. Mine's set to D. For duplicate, and then it moves it in the future, I have it to Shift D, and then to delete the entire keyframe and all its layers, I have it set to Control D. And then for my Shift F, I have it actually set at a more global level. I believe it's here. Yeah, I have it set at grease pencil global. So I think like whenever I'm in draw mode or selected on a grease pencil, I can add a new frame. So that's up to you. I wouldn't go outside of, I would actually just put everything in draw mode. It's designed to work in draw mode and not in edit mode, because there's other things that are bound to D and F that you don't want to mess with typically. So go ahead and just stick it under grease pencil stroke mode. Okay, so now that you have your operators bound to keyboard shortcuts, I did want to cover one more set of keyboard shortcuts, and that is I have A and F bound to jump between keyframes. So I can just easily, if I just add a bunch of keyframes with Shift F, I can just jump between all of them like they were panels in Storyboard Pro, and that's the idea behind this. Trying to get that speed going, get that next drawing in, not worrying about all the other stuff that's going on. So that's setting up the keyboard shortcuts. Now let's hop into a demo. Okay, so now that you have your keyboard shortcuts assigned to the different operators, I'm going to go ahead and show you exactly what they do. So the first thing is you can decide what you want to animate on. which is essentially saying how many frames in the future do you want the next keyframe to be added. And the whole philosophy and the idea behind this was to speed up the next drawing, like actually just getting to the drawing, because currently the only way to do it right now in Blender is to move the timeline and then, you know, draw something different. Yeah, so you move the timeline and you draw. Move the timeline and you draw. So then you can, you know, you'll see your frames that way. That gets a little annoying having to constantly going down on the timeline, and that's where the whole idea of this came about. If you put in 12 here, so half a second if you're rendering on 24 frames a second, and you hit the new button, it'll insert a keyframe 12 frames into the future. So you can just keep hitting this and it'll just keep going. And so I've mapped this to Shift F, so anytime I'm, you know, drawing something and I hit Shift F, I get a new frame in the future. And if I go ahead and turn on onion layers and overlays, and I think I need to, oh, I have to go, sorry, material preview, and then you can see onion layers. So there you can see the previous frame. So I'm making a new drawing with just Shift F, and I never have to leave the canvas, which is the fun part. And I forgot to mention that I bind jump to the next keyframe with A and F, which is, I think, a pretty common Storyboard Pro setup. So I basically can go between keyframes with just A and F, and then Shift F is a new frame. And then now, if you want to duplicate a drawing, it'll be based off the 12 that you've assigned here. You can also change this on the, you know, on the fly if you want to switch to whatever number. So now if I hit duplicate, it now moved the timeline over 6 frames and duplicated this drawing. So now you see between frame 121 and 127, I have the same guy with the hat. So that's those two operators. That's pretty straightforward. I'll show you what the shift future frames means in a little bit. This next row is pretty straightforward. It basically just adds so many keyframes. So if you want like 10 additional frames in the future, you could do that. So if I go ahead and if I hit add multiple, it'll add 10 new frames and then spacing it by 6 frames. So there you have from 127 to 133, that's 6, and then each one after that for 10 frames. What it'll do is if I hit Control Z, since I have a drawing here and I'm on a keyframe that has a drawing, it'll jump 6 frames and then it will insert all 10 frames at that point. It won't like overwrite this frame. It won't, you know, it's thinking you want to preserve the frame that you're on. So if you add 10, you still have the guy at 127 and you have 10 new drawings. So this is helpful if you want to, you know, set up so many drawings, for instance. You can change this, I think, up to 1,000, which I haven't tried. I probably wouldn't recommend doing. I figured 10 is a good default number. You know, if maybe you're just sketching and you want so many pages, for instance, you can just you can do that. The next row is about, as it would suggest, clearing your layers and deleting keyframes. So the first one, clear layers, will for all of your layers that are unlocked, it'll clear all of the drawings and fills and everything. So here, if I've mapped this to D. So if I hit D, it'll just clear all of the drawings, but it will keep the keyframe there. And I like to do this because, like, if I start drawing a new character or pose or something, and I don't like where this is going, like in Procreate, where you can just like hold down on the iPad, this is how you can just, press D and clear the drawing and start over. So that's really, otherwise you have to, go into edit mode, press whatever your select all is, which is A for me. So if I do A, it selects all of the stroke, everything, and then whatever is unlocked, and then I would hit D. But now you can just stay in draw mode and go through and, oh, I don't like this, and then you just hit D. So delete frames suggests what the operator says. It'll actually delete all of your keyframes here. So if I have a dude here and I've mapped this to Control D. So if I hit Control D, it'll actually delete the frame here. So that there's use cases for that. And then again, if I actually want a new drawing here, I can hit Shift F is for new frame. Now I can hit Control D. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. You can just hit Control Z. Or if you want to, if I go to the frame, if I want this drawing, and I want to move myself on the timeline somewhere, what you can do is you can either hit Shift F for a new drawing, but if you want that same drawing, you can just hit duplicate, which will do that. And I have that mapped to Shift D. Sorry if I didn't say that. So to summarize, I use A and F to jump between keyframes, and then I use Shift F to create a new drawing, and I'll hit Control Z, and then I have Shift D to duplicate a drawing, the one that you're on or the one that's active that you can see. And then I have D for clear layers, so D, and then for delete frame, it's Control D. And that is basically the workflow, the operators. It's great for storyboarding when you're thinking panel to panel. And that actually gets me into the next, this button here at the top, which is Shift Future Keyframes. So this allows you to kind of work in two philosophies. If you want to preserve the timing of all your keys on your timeline, and if you turn it off, I'll jump into another scene which shows you why you would want to turn it off and not shift future keys. So let's say if I start over here, and we'll just have our stick figure guy. I got a little musketeer thing going. Let's change this to stroke. Right, so if we want to, let's say we duplicate this drawing a few times, right, at 12 frames. So I could just hit Shift D, and I'm getting the same drawing over these 4 keyframes here at the bottom. Now, let's say I actually want a new drawing in between 25 and 37. So, I don't know, 37, he's angry. 25, he's surprised. And then 37, he's angry. And if I want a drawing between that, let me just move them down here. Then you can shift the timeline down here. You could also hold Alt, and I have it as middle mouse click. You can scrub the timeline up here, which is pretty nifty. It's a little visually hard to understand where you are, but if you just, the little gray squares you can see there are keyframes. So if I put it in between here, you'll notice in the timeline that you have no keyframe here, right? So if you were to insert a new frame here or duplicate, and you have this ticked, Shift Future Keyframes, it'll want to honor the spacing of the subsequent keyframe to be 12 frames ahead. So I'll do it around a whole number, so 37 and 30. If I want to insert it at 30, it'll push the next keyframe so that it's 12 frames in the future from 30. So I'll hit new. And so now we have a new keyframe here, and the next keyframe, if I hit A, it's 12 frames in the future. So if I hit Control Z a couple times, it's the same thing for duplicate. If I want to duplicate this drawing and I have this in the future, this tick to shift future frames, it'll just duplicate the drawing and it'll move everything over so that it thinks that you want those 12 frames before the next drawing. The idea behind this is more of a traditional like Storyboard Pro setup where like you're just doing 2D boards. You're not doing this hybrid thing with all these cameras and camera ranges or camera markers, all that stuff. It's just like if you just want a 2D focused storyboard experience, then you would keep this on, and then you could basically just, you could write out like every 12 frames and you can just watch your drawings play through. That's how you would do that. And then anytime you go in between, you're like, oh, I want a new drawing, after my frame 66, I want a new drawing at 70, but I want to, all of the frames that I've created in the future, I want them to maintain that timing. which is kind of like a default setting in Storyboard Pro, where it's like every new frame you add is like half a second. That's basically the idea behind it. So you could do new frame, and then, or set frame 70, yeah, and then the next one is now 12 frames in the future. So that's the idea behind that, and that holds for new and duplicate. It does not, currently it doesn't work with the add multiple frames. Add multiple is just always going to push everything in the future. It's not going to try and squeeze as many frames as possible if you have this ticked off. So just be aware that that's why this is separate, is that the shift future only applies to what's going on in this top box here. So if, for instance, now that we know we have 12 frames in between 70 and 82, do 82 here. I'm gonna turn off onion skins. If you hit Shift F here, again, it's gonna move everything in the future. And I went from frame 70 to 82, which if you remember, there was a keyframe already on 82, so it's gonna push that forward. It's basically inserting a keyframe, so I'll do that. So just to go back, we're at 70 and 82. Now, if we don't wanna do that, and we want to, which I'll show you in like a real scenario with multiple cameras and stuff in a second. If we turn this off and we do 12 here, it'll try its best to jump 12 frames in the future, but it will not move any of the keyframes. So in this situation where we have it on 12 and there is a keyframe 12 frames ahead, it'll split the difference because it'll think you're trying to insert a keyframe, but you want to keep this philosophy of not moving anything in the future. So if I hit Shift F or you press the new button, it'll do it 6 frames in the future because it's halfway in between. The only time that this runs into an issue is when you get up to that last frame of space left. So I'll show you here. I'm just going to hit 76. I'm going to hit Shift F, 76, 79. That's, you know, in between 82, 79. So here 76, 79, and if I hit Shift F again, it's gonna split the difference, and then again, and then now I'm at 81 and 82. So if I hit a new frame, there's nothing, it has to move 82 over, it won't delete it. So if I do 81 and I hit Shift F right here, it just pushes everything 1 frame over. But it keeps the timing of all your keyframes in the future the same, and that's a default setting in Blender. When you go to Draw, you go to Animation, you insert blank keyframes, it'll typically move everything over. I think it actually just moves over the next one. Let's see. But again, I want to, no, yeah, it moves it all. It moves everything over. Yeah. So that's the kind of thing you need to realize, is whether or not you want to push all your future keyframes, which when in a hybrid setting you don't really want to do, because all your future drawings are associated with some other animation going on or other characters. So you kind of want to keep it pretty consistent. So I typically have this off just as a default, but if you want to move everything around and you're thinking just purely in a 2D sense and future timing, it's good to, you can take this on. It gives you that option. Again, multiple frames doesn't work like that. If I were to insert 10 frames between 83 and 95 at, I don't know, every 6 frames, it's not going to try and squeeze 10 frames in between 83 and 95. It's just going to push everything over. So if I hit 10, actually, sorry, before I do that, let me go here. Here's frame 95, and I'm going to insert 10 frames. Now this is 83. So if I hit this, we still have 83 at 83 because we had a frame. And so now we want to just move over 6, and then we want to insert 10. And then here at the end of it, so here's the first frame of when we added 10. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So here are 10 new frames. And then the next frame was the frame in between where we inserted these 10. So that was 95. And it spaced it out 6 frames from 95, and then it also kept the same timing between all subsequent frames after that. These all work when you are in between somewhere. So again, you can just add 10, it'll add 10 from where you've inserted. So if you don't have a keyframe somewhere you are on the timeline, it'll insert a keyframe at that point on the timeline. So here at 86, it'll be, so Shift F, you have a new frame. And then if I want to, you know, you can again hold an Alt middle mouse on my pen here, which I've mapped to the bottom button. So middle mouse, and then if I want to hit, so like, okay, here's 92, frame 92, and I go over here, I just, for some reason, I specifically want it in advance by like 3 frames and not using this thing. Then I can just hit Shift D, and then now I have 92 and 92 on 95. So this is the duplicate. So that's the gist of it. In short, it's just a couple of shortcuts. The main thinking behind it is jumping into the future on the timeline without having to leave draw mode, without having to leave the cursor on the canvas. It can get very, you know, cumbersome and going back and forth constantly. And then when you start doing that, you start thinking about timing. And really, when I'm storyboarding in Blender, I'm just trying to think about the timing of the acting. And I don't know, I usually just like the main poses I need. So I usually just start on 12, which is half a second. And that usually is a good starting point for me to actually start working. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. The clear layers one that was something I added recently, and that's been amazing because it's just so much faster than having to go into edit mode and keep drawing. Cool, so now I'm gonna jump into an actual scene that I've done, and I'm gonna show you why you wanna keep the shift future frames unticked, and kind of like a working example of how you can use this. All right, so now we're in this little exercise that I did. This scene is inspired by Tokyo Vice, which is an HBO show. Been studying a lot of Michael Mann recently, and so I've kind of just done a couple of cameras and this scene of this dude being interrogated. And so I did this all with the add-on that I use for shot management is Storyliner, which was formerly called Ubisoft Shot Manager. And yeah, and then using Whippet GP to just get that next keyframe in a little bit faster, which every second counts. So here in this last shot, I've left blank. I will select my character here. And I'm gonna close down the object stuff so you can see the actual drawings. And then pretty much how I like to work, I try and hide as many panels as possible. I think now that I have the grease pencil things here, you can almost get by without having to select anything. I also use, so I'm gonna close this. I like to use either the outliner here at the bottom, and then I have Whippet GP here. Also, if you hover over any of the drop-down menus and you press A, it'll close them. So it's a little shortcut. If you want to get rid of this and see something, you can do this. I also use Vision GP, which I highly recommend because it gives you a couple of different shortcuts here at the bottom right, such as your outliner, which I use to select cameras if I need to go about stuff. If you actually tick it on, you get all of these other shortcuts that you can customize, like where you want them located and stuff like that. So basically, like the whole point of Whippet GP was just an efficiency thing, but it actually kind of complements other add-ons for Blender, and doesn't try and like redo what anyone else is really doing, which is pretty nice. So again, I like to have Vision GP on. I use Storyliner for the shot management, which is what you can see here in the timeline, these bars for all the different cameras. There's also a whole menu system here, but that's for another video. So I'm gonna go ahead and just turn this off so we're just focused on the drawings and a couple of other menu processes here for the Whippet tutorial. So, you know, if I'm working here, I can do animate on 12, and like if for some reason, just turn off the cameras. If I want to, you know, copy this guy's drawing and move it over 12 frames and maybe he, I don't know, closes his eyes or blinks or something like that, that's where this just gets pretty quick. I can think, okay, I'm gonna work on 12, so every half second I'm gonna move his drawing over. And if I just hit Shift D, then I've got the same drawing 12 frames in advance. I can go into object mode to draw or material preview. Then I can you know, maybe just take his eyes out. And then, oops, I'm working on the rough. Got my brush selected. I've got the material pinned. Change this to 1. You know, you just maybe close his eyes. It's a blink, and then I can hit. You can either, you know, I could grab this keyframe again and just move it right after, and then now I have like this little blink action. Maybe after he blinks, he actually looks the other way. So that's kind of like an example of, this is kind of a very small and basic example of how you can, you know, use it in a real setting. Again, I have the shift future frames off because, for instance, if I went to this camera and I wanted to insert a drawing of the mob boss that I've selected over here, I can do it here. So I've got 6 frames between here and there. I could, you know, insert a new drawing. He's gone, and then I could draw something else here, a new pose or whatnot. And when I did that and I had this unticked, it didn't affect anything in the future, right? And that's essentially what we want to do. We don't want to move things like all the drawings in the future that are timed to these other cameras. So that's the philosophy behind this. And if you turn this on, then you're going to start moving everything. As you can see, we inserted 12 in the future from where we were at 724. We went 12 frames in advance, and it kept 12 frames from, it also gave that 12 frame spacing between the next drawing as well to this one. So when you're working in this hybrid kind of mode where you have this camera management tool, you typically want to just keep this off, so you don't start messing with all these keyframes that you have already done. Another thing I noticed actually recently was your material management. So for instance, if you're on a character, let's say this character in the background, this guy here, not all of the materials that you have for one grease pencil object carry over. They're kind of, materials are, they're basically saved to a grease pencil object. So I have this blood material on this, it's just red ink, whatever. But I have this on this character. If I go here and I want to use this one, so if I'll just use draw fill. It's an unpinned thing. I don't actually have the specific red ink associated with this grease pencil object. So what you can do here is I've added, you know, you can add the plus button, which will create, it'll create a new material, or a new material slot, I should say. And then if you hit this button, you can actually search for all of your materials that exist. And then you can say, okay, I want the red ink. And then it appears here. And then now, since it's unpinned and I'm at origin view, I can now draw. And then what I can do is, if I hit Shift D here, I'm basically copying all these keyframes and putting them here. And I can, oops, there we go. Now it's red. Yeah, so now I can draw blood on him if I need to. And then I can hit, now I don't want this keyframe, I can just hit Control D and it will delete that actual keyframe. So that kind of takes you through the menus that you're probably already familiar with. Again, they're all just based off of the standard grease pencil menus. So again, the layers, just the core features, the materials, and then the tool one, which is in your sidebar, and it's to get this brush setting and the radius and strength and that kind of thing. So I've kind of just put them all in one little place because it's just much more efficient, because you can see it's in 3 different places, and you're just, it's annoying having to go back to, you know, a bunch of different places where you can just, like, all you really need for storyboarding is a few layer management tools, changing color, or your materials. I work with materials, I don't work with color attribute, or color attribute mode, where you can actually change it. I like the ability, knowing that I've used a material, that I can change across the entire scene if I need to, and not have to like tint certain strokes or something after the fact. That's the essence of Whippet GP. I mean, that covers most of the things. Again, just keep in mind the add multiple does not abide by this box being checked or not. Only new and only duplicate. So one more time to summarize everything up. I have new frame set to Shift F, duplicate to Shift D. I use A and F. If I have to scroll, I have to scrub to activate the camera. I have A and F to jump between keyframes, and I have clear layers as D, so I'm going to just clear the whole drawing, and I have delete is on Control D to actually delete the frames. One thing I actually didn't mention was if you have a locked layer, it will not add a new frame if that layer is locked. And the reason why that works is basically I like to work with these height guides essentially, and it kind of gives me a better sense of where they are in space. So I have this is a grease pencil layer here at the bottom. All my characters typically have them. They're colored differently, and I have the first frame of the scene has it, and then what I do is I lock that layer here. You can do that here, or you can do that here, and moving forward, I keep this layer because this grease pencil, these few strokes here, this blue stroke thing, moves around in the entire environment with the character wherever it goes, and then wherever I am on the timeline, it also continues existing because I have it locked, so you can't change it. And so all of these features abide by the lock layer thing. It checks to see if it's locked. If it's locked, it won't insert a new key on a lock layer, and that the idea behind that is so that you can have reference sketches or models or something, and you can just tick them on and off, and then you can just have them at the front, and you'll never actually lose that first drawing where all that stuff lives on. So everything, all the operators check to see whether or not something is locked. So that wraps up our Whippet GP demo. I will link the documentation for my website below in the comments section. I'll also link my social media, so if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and I'll do my best to get back to you on if you have any issues or setup process, that kind of thing. And yeah, I look really forward to seeing what people post. I hope it speeds up your workflow a little bit. It takes a little getting used to setting up new keyboard shortcuts, but I promise you it's a little bit faster than having to go down and move the timeline around and stuff like that. So wish you all the best, and yeah, thanks again. Bye.